Hi, everyone. Module 4 is about 21st century learning. I wanted to talk about just a couple of things before I show you some really cool resources. I'm going to spend most of my time on resources. One thing I want to say is with 21st century learning, um, so first of all, technology isn't the equivalent of 21st century learning, right? Technology lets students display their learning in a really cool way, but there's lots of other things to consider in 21st century learning. And you've all read articles about the 4 C's and the 6 C's and all that. And we know that creativity and collaboration are huge in all of those aspects. So that brings me to a couple of points. One is people are talking about one-to-one devices and things like that. So I never have one-to-one in my class, and it's because I think that one-to-one is actually going a step back from 21st century learning. I have either 2-to-one or 4-to-one. So students, a group of students, either 2 or 4 students, will only have one device. And if I want them all to answer something in like a Google survey, like I sent to you guys, they all just get to answer once. So where the 21st century learning happens is they all have to kind of debate and argue, and they have to come up with one answer that they agree on. So if I ask them to estimate something, they can't just all put in what they think, but they have to discuss it and come to a closest estimate that the group feels is the best, and then they can submit it. And to me, that's 21st century learning in action, where they have to kind of debate things and do that. Okay, so I want to show you a few things now that are just resource based. The first one I'll show you is called Would You Rather Math. It's on my website of resources. But it's a whole list of would you rather this, would you rather that. I chose to focus on this one. So would you rather a one-time payment of $1 million or a penny on day one, two on day two, four on day three, and so on? If you think about our curriculum, I can ask this question in many different grades. I can ask it in grade 9, in grade 10, and in grade 11. And actually, I can ask it in grade 12 as well. And you can also ask it in grade 8 if we're looking for tables of values to be extended. So this question can go a long way with having our students just think. So first I would ask students, which one would you rather? I would take some answers down. I would probably actually get everybody to answer, and I'd put their names on a tally, like who wants the 1 million and who wants this. And then we'd probably spend the rest of the class coming up with different models where we could check which person made the smart decision. We'd probably have to look up things like life expectancy. We'd probably have to look up things like, well, when you buy a house, like, there's a down payment and there's your monthly payments, or are these options going to satisfy that? Some students who are very astute might say that they want this right away and then they'll invest it. And that's great, but then we have to look into those investments. So there's a ton of math that's happening here. So this website is started by a man named John Stadel, I believe. This is his worksheet. So would you rather option A or option B? Break it down. Which one's better? I would rather because this. So students get used to using these organizers, and they go a long way. So that's Would You Rather Math. And I'm going to show you another one called Estimation 180. This is something that I do with my students a warm-up activity every day. Our Minds On is sometimes tied to the curriculum that we're dealing with that day, but sometimes is just tied to the big idea, like estimation might be a big idea that we're going to use today. So I would use Estimation 180 to warm up. So for example, I just asked my students, how many pieces do you think are in this quarter cup, right? And so students have to enter something that's too low, too high, something that they think is a good estimate, their reasoning, and then their name. And they submit that. It all goes to a database. And then we can either just look at what the answer is, or this makes for a really exciting few seconds in class. If I just play this video, And students are anticipating, oh, whose estimate was good, whose estimate was good. And then we fast forward and it's getting real close and students are like, oh, sweet. So in this case, whoever said 19 would have been right. But you see how that would be a nice little way to get students engaged, because they're all arguing about, oh no, it's this many, and then finally we watch the video. And then the cool thing is there's extension videos. Like if that didn't take too long, then we can go on to this one. How many do you think come in the bag? And if it did take long enough, then I could just finish it at the quarter cup. Okay, now I want to show you a few people have been talking about graphing calculators and things like that in their responses. So I want to show you this. This is Desmos.com. I'm going to come back to this again to show you another part of it, but Desmos is a graphing calculator, which is, I want to say it's transformed my teaching, and I think many people's teaching. I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I want students to graph. So y equals 2n plus 4, all right? So that's graphed, that's great. Now, let's say that I want to know what happens if this 4 changes. So 1, I could change it to a 5 really quickly. I could change it to a 6 really quickly. That's great. But what if I make it a letter, a parameter? And oh, sorry, I think I did that too quickly. So it says add slider, and I'm going to choose to add slider B because B is what I want to change. So right now B is 1, and as I change it, that's what happens to the line. So I think that that's pretty cool, and I would have students make some observations about that. And I say, okay, so this is B is 7. So let's say B is 7. Okay. And now I ask, well, what happens if we change this 2? So I don't know, let's make it an M. Okay. So now M is 1. And now what's happening as I change it? Oh, well, that's interesting. And so I'd have students make some observations again. And I'd actually want to put this in their hands. So this is when phones come in handy. And I know a lot of people were posting on whether phones should be allowed and when they should be allowed. And Desmos is something that works on your phone. So I do this with my students all the time. My students can have their phones out on their desks all the time. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. It works for me. Because if a student is getting out of hand, I just remind them and then eventually they can't have their phone there. But for the most part, it works for me. So those are some cool resources that I think foster 21st century learning. You can see that the first two are not very high tech. Desmos is pretty high tech. It's pretty awesome. And I'll show you some other things that it does. But they're all very user friendly. And I think that they all let us talk about and investigate some math very quickly and with very good purpose. Okay, so that's me on 21st century learning, and we'll talk again next module.